The first narrative filmmaker was a woman, and she directed over 1,000 films, many now lost. A doctor was locked in an asylum for suggesting handwashing could save mothers from dying after childbirth. Your ability to stand in the world's tallest skyscrapers is largely thanks to an engineer from Dhaka. Chief organizer of the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, was an openly gay black man whose contributions were often downplayed. A poor, uneducated woman in the 1800s discovered some of the first complete dinosaur skeletons, forever changing science. Cells taken from a black woman without her consent in 1951 are still alive today, underpinning vaccines, cancer research, and cloning. Months before Rosa Parks' famous act, a 15-year-old girl was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat, but her story was largely sidelined. The law ensuring equal access to education for women in the U.S. Title IX was championed by the first woman of color elected to Congress. The system for storing blood, plasma, saving countless lives in World War II, was developed by a black surgeon who later resigned when the Red Cross insisted on segregating blood by race. Number 9. The doctor who revolutionized blood storage, but battled a racist system. His name was Dr. Charles R. Drew, and his work transformed medicine. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1904, Drew was a gifted athlete and student. He earned his medical degree from McGill University in Montreal, Canada, finishing second in his class. His real journey into medical history began at Columbia University in New York, where he pursued his doctorate in the late 1930s. His research focused on a pressing problem: blood storage. At the time, whole blood couldn't be stored for more than a few days, making transfusions difficult and large-scale blood banking nearly impossible. Drew's breakthrough research centered on blood plasma, the liquid component of blood without the cells. He discovered that plasma could be stored for much longer periods than whole blood. It could also be dried and then reconstituted when needed. This was a game changer. He developed methods for processing and preserving plasma, making it safer and more practical for transfusions. His doctoral thesis, Banked Blood, a study in blood preservation, was a landmark in the field. As World War II raged in Europe, Drew's expertise became critically important. In 1940, he was chosen to head the Blood for Britain project. This initiative aimed to collect and ship large quantities of plasma from the United States to Great Britain to treat wounded soldiers and civilians. Drew implemented large-scale production techniques for plasma, including mobile blood donation stations, which were later dubbed blood mobiles. The project was a massive success, saving thousands of lives. His success led to his appointment as the director of the first American Red Cross blood bank in 1941, tasked with setting up a national blood program for the U.S. military. However, Drew soon encountered a policy that deeply troubled him. The U.S. military insisted that the blood donated by Black Americans be segregated from that donated by white Americans. Drew, a black man himself, knew there was no scientific basis for this racial segregation of blood. He protested this policy, arguing that blood from all races was biologically the same and that such segregation was unscientific and insulting. Despite his protests, the policy remained. Frustrated and unwilling to compromise his principles, Dr. Drew resigned from his position at the Red Cross Blood Bank in 1942. He returned to Howard University as a professor and head of the Department of Surgery, where he continued to train young black surgeons and advocate for racial equality in medicine. He often said, "Excellence of performance will transcend artificial barriers created by man." Tragically, Dr. Charles Drew died on April 1, 1950 at the age of 45, from injuries sustained in a car accident in North Carolina while traveling to a medical conference. For years, a persistent myth circulated that he died because he was denied a blood transfusion at a whites-only hospital. While he did receive medical attention, the severity of his injuries made survival unlikely. His work on blood plasma, however, had already laid the foundation for modern blood banking systems, saving countless lives during the war and for many decades since. His techniques for plasma processing and storage are still relevant, and his advocacy for equality continues to inspire. Number 8. The woman who fought for your right to play sports and go to college. Patsy Mink was born in Paia, Maui, in the territory of Hawaii in 1927. From a young age, she experienced discrimination. As a Japanese American during World War II, she witnessed prejudice firsthand. She excelled in school, dreaming of becoming a doctor. She was valedictorian of her high school class and attended the University of Hawaii. She then transferred to the University of Nebraska, but faced segregation there. Students of color were not allowed to live in the main dormitories. She organized and led a coalition of students, parents, and university staff to successfully protest and end these segregationist policies. After graduating, she applied to numerous medical schools, but was rejected by all of them over a dozen, because she was a woman. This experience shifted her ambitions towards law, so she could fight the kind of discrimination she had encountered. She attended the University of Chicago Law School, where she met and married John Mink. After graduating in 1951, she moved back to Hawaii with her husband and daughter. She faced more barriers. She couldn't find a job at a law firm because she was a married woman, and some firms even told her they didn't hire women. So she started her own law practice in 1953. Patsy Mink soon entered politics. She was elected to the Hawaii Territorial Legislature in 1956 and the Territorial Senate in 1958. When Hawaii became a state in 1959, she ran for Congress but lost. She didn't give up. In 1964, she ran again and won, becoming the first woman of color and the first Asian American woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. In Congress, Mink was a passionate advocate for civil rights, women's rights, and education. She was an early opponent of the Vietnam War. Her most significant legislative achievement is Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. While Senator Birch Bayh is often credited as the father of Title IX, Mink was a crucial co-author and driving force behind the bill in the House. Title IX prohibits sex-based discrimination in any federally funded education program or activity. It states, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." The impact of Title IX was profound. It dramatically increased opportunities for women and girls in education, particularly in athletics. Before Title IX, very few girls played high school sports, and college athletic scholarships for women were rare. After its passage, participation in women's sports skyrocketed. It also opened doors for women in academic fields previously dominated by men, like science, medicine, and law. Mink served in Congress for a total of 12 terms, from 1965 to 1977, and again from 1990 until her death in 2002. She fought for gender and racial equality throughout her career, championing issues like affordable childcare, bilingual education, and student loan programs. After her death, Title IX was officially renamed the Patsy Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act in her honor. Her work fundamentally changed the landscape of American education, ensuring that millions of women had a fairer chance to learn and succeed. Number 7. The teenager who defied segregation before Rosa Parks, but history chose someone else. 9 months before Rosa Parks made her historic stand on a Montgomery bus, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin did the same thing in the same city on a similar bus. On March 2, 1955, Claudette was riding home from high school. When the bus became crowded, the driver ordered her and 3 other black students to give up their seats in the colored section to a white passenger. The other students moved, but Claudette refused. She had been learning about black history and civil rights in school, and she felt it was her constitutional right to sit there. Claudette later said she felt Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman were pushing her down on the seat. The bus driver called the police. 2 officers arrived, dragged Claudette off the bus, kicking and screaming, and arrested her. She was charged with disturbing the peace, violating segregation laws, and assaulting a police officer. She was terrified but resolute. News of Claudette's arrest spread through Montgomery's black community. Civil rights activists, including Rosa Parks, who was then an NAACP secretary and investigator, and E.D. Nixon, initially considered using Claudette's case to challenge segregation laws. However, they ultimately decided against making her the public face of their movement. Claudette was young, unmarried, and became pregnant a few months later. Some leaders felt that these factors might make her an unsympathetic figure to a wider, more conservative public, and could be used by opponents to discredit the movement. Rosa Parks, a respected middle-aged woman with a strong record in the NAACP, was seen as a more suitable symbol. Despite being sidelined in the public narrative, Claudette Colvin's actions were legally significant. She became one of 4 plaintiffs in the landmark federal court case, Browder v. Gale. This was the case, not Rosa Parks' individual arrest, that ultimately led to the Supreme Court ruling that Alabama's and Montgomery's bus segregation laws were unconstitutional. In the Browder v. Gale trial, Claudette testified about her arrest. Her courageous testimony, along with that of the other plaintiffs, Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald, and Mary Louise Smith, who had also been arrested for similar reasons, was crucial to the court's decision in June 1956. The Supreme Court upheld this decision in November 1956, and Montgomery buses were officially desegregated in December 1956. Claudette Colvin paid a personal price for her bravery. She was branded a troublemaker and found it hard to find work in Montgomery. She eventually moved to New York City in 1958, where she worked as a nurse's aide for many years, living in relative obscurity. Her contribution to the civil rights movement was largely overlooked by historians and the media for decades. Only much later did her story begin to receive wider recognition. Books and articles started to explore her role, and she began to speak publicly about her experiences. In 2021, at the age of 82, Claudette Colvin had her juvenile record expunged by a Montgomery judge who stated her actions were a form of civil disobedience that was recognized as a courageous act on her part and on behalf of a community of affected people. Her story highlights that movements are often built on the courage of many individuals, not all of whom become household names. Number 6. The woman whose cells never died and changed medicine forever without her knowing. Henrietta Lacks was a young black tobacco farmer from Virginia who died of cervical cancer in 1951 at the age of 31. She was treated at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, one of the few major hospitals at the time that treated black patients. During her radiation treatments, a surgeon took samples of her cancerous tumor without her knowledge or consent. This was a common practice at the time, particularly in wards serving poor black patients. A researcher at Johns Hopkins, Dr. George Gay, had been trying for years to grow human cells in his lab. Most human cells died quickly outside the body, but Henrietta's cells were different. They were astonishingly resilient. They not only survived, but they multiplied at an incredible rate, doubling every 20 to 24 hours. They were, for all intents and purposes, immortal. Dr. Gay named the cell line Hella, using the first two letters of Henrietta Lacks' first and last names. Hella cells quickly became a cornerstone of medical research. They were the first human cells to be successfully cloned. They were mass-produced and distributed to scientists around the world. Hella cells played a vital role in developing the polio vaccine in the 1950s. They were used to test its effectiveness. They were sent into space to see how human cells reacted to zero gravity. They were used in research on cancer, AIDS, gene mapping, cloning, in vitro, fertilization, and the effects of radiation and toxins. Thousands of scientific papers have been published based on research using Hella cells, and they have contributed to numerous Nobel Prize-winning discoveries. For decades, Henrietta Lacks' family had no idea that her cells were still alive and being used in research. They lived in poverty, often struggling to afford healthcare themselves, while Henrietta's cells were generating millions of dollars for biomedical companies. In the 1970s, researchers contacted the Lacks family to take blood samples, hoping to learn more about the genetics of Hella cells. This was when the family first learned the truth about Henrietta's cells. They were confused and distressed, not understanding how Henrietta could be alive in labs around the world. The story of Henrietta Lacks and her immortal cells raises profound ethical questions about patient consent, medical privacy, racial inequities in healthcare, and who benefits from biological materials. Her cells were taken at a time when informed consent was not a standard practice, especially for Black patients. The Lacks family received no financial compensation for the widespread use of Henrietta's cells, nor were they initially consulted about how her genetic information was used. Rebecca Skloot's Biliect 2010 book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, brought widespread public attention to Henrietta's story and the ethical issues surrounding it. The Lacks family has since become more involved in discussions about the use of Hella cells. In 2013, an agreement was reached with the National Institutes of Health that gives the Lacks family some say in how Henrietta's Langamel data is used in future research. Henrietta Lacks' unwitting contribution transformed medical science, and her story continues to shape conversations about ethics and equity in research. Number 5. The fossil hunter who rocked the science world, but men took the credit. Mary Anning was born in 1799 in Lyme Regis, a coastal town in Dorset, England, which is now part of the Jurassic Coast, a World Heritage Site famous for its rich fossil beds. Her family was poor. Her father, Richard Anning, was a cabinet maker who supplemented his income by mining fossils from the seaside cliffs and selling them to tourists. Mary learned the trade from him. After her father died when she was just 11, Mary continued fossil hunting with her brother Joseph to help support their family. She had a keen eye and an uncanny ability to spot fossils. In 1811, when Mary was around 12, her brother Joseph found a strange-looking fossilized skull. Over the next several months, Mary painstakingly excavated the rest of the skeleton. It was the first complete ichthyosaur skeleton, a marine reptile that lived during the Jurassic period, to be recognized by the scientific community in London. This discovery, made by a young, uneducated girl from a poor background, caused a sensation. Mary Anning went on to make several other extraordinary discoveries. In 1823, she found the first complete plesiosaur skeleton. This creature was so bizarre-looking that some scientists initially thought it was a fake. Georges Cuvier, a leading French naturalist, eventually confirmed its authenticity. In 1828, she discovered the first pterosaur skeleton found outside of Germany, which provided crucial evidence that these flying reptiles had existed in Britain. She also made important finds related to fossil fish and invertebrates, and she was one of the first to discover and understand coprolites, fossilized feces, which provided new insights into ancient ecosystems. Despite her remarkable contributions, Mary Anning faced significant obstacles. As a woman in the early 19th century, she was barred from joining the Geological Society of London or formally participating in the scientific community. Her discoveries were often discussed at meetings she couldn't attend, and scientific papers were published about her fossils, frequently without even mentioning her name or giving her full credit for the find. The male scientists who bought her fossils and wrote about them often received the accolades. She also struggled financially throughout her life, as fossil hunting was her primary source of income. Anning was highly knowledgeable about geology and anatomy, learning much through her own diligent study and dissection. She corresponded with prominent scientists of the day, such as William Buckland and Henry de la Beche, who did acknowledge her skills and often visited her in Lyme Regis to consult with her and purchase fossils. De la Beche later painted Duria Antiquior, a more ancient Dorset, a vivid depiction of prehistoric life based on Anning's discoveries, and sold prints of it to raise money for her when she was in financial difficulty. Mary Anning died of breast cancer in 1847 at the age of 47. Only after her death did her contributions begin to be more formally recognized. The Geological Society of London paid tribute to her, and later, a stained glass window was dedicated to her memory in her local church, funded by members of the society. Mary Anning's work significantly advanced the young science of paleontology and contributed to the growing understanding that life on Earth had changed dramatically over vast periods of time, challenging prevailing views about the history of life and the planet. Number 4. The mastermind behind the March on Washington you've probably never heard of. Bayard Rustin was one of the most brilliant strategists and organizers of the American civil rights movement, yet his name is often missing from mainstream accounts of that era. Born in 1912 in West Chester, Pennsylvania, Rustin was raised by his grandparents. His grandmother, a Quaker, instilled in him a lifelong commitment to nonviolence. He was an exceptional student, musician, and athlete. In the 1930s, Rustin moved to Harlem and became involved in pacifist and civil rights activism. He joined the Young Communist League for a period, believing they were committed to racial equality, but left when the party changed its focus. He worked with Philip Randolph, a prominent labor leader, on the 1941 March on Washington movement, which aimed to protest segregation in the armed forces and defense industries. Though the march itself was called off after President Roosevelt issued an executive order banning discrimination in defense jobs, the experience was formative for Rustin. Rustin was a devoted practitioner of Gandhian nonviolence. In 1942, he co-founded the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, with James Farmer and George Hauser. In 1947, he organized the Journey of Reconciliation, an early freedom ride, where an interracial group rode buses through the segregated South to test a Supreme Court ruling that banned segregation in interstate travel. Rustin and others were arrested and served time on a chain gang in North Carolina for this action. His most significant, yet often uncredited role was as the chief architect of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This was the monumental event where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. Rustin was the deputy director of the march under a Philip Randolph, but he was the lead organizer responsible for the immense logistical and political undertaking. He managed everything from training volunteer marshals and arranging transportation for tens of thousands of people to designing the sound system and coordinating with police. He did all this in just 2 months, creating a peaceful and powerful demonstration that became a turning point in the civil rights movement. Despite his immense contributions, Rustin was often forced to work in the shadows. This was largely because he was an openly gay man at a time when homosexuality was deeply stigmatized and criminalized. Some civil rights leaders worried that Rustin's sexual orientation, along with his past communist associations and his pacifist stance — he was a conscientious objector during World War II and was imprisoned for it — would be used by opponents to discredit the movement. Senator Strom Thurmond even attacked Rustin on the Senate floor shortly before the 1963 march, attempting to derail it. Dr. King valued Rustin's counsel and strategic brilliance, and Rustin played a key role in introducing King to Gandhian nonviolence. However, even King sometimes succumbed to pressure to distance himself from Rustin publicly. Despite these challenges, Rustin remained committed to the struggle for equality. After the successes of the 1960s, he continued to work on issues of human rights, economic justice, and democratic reform, both in the US and internationally. He advocated for a shift in the civil rights movement's focus from protest to politics. Bayard Rustin died in 1987. In the decades since his death, there has been a growing recognition of his pivotal role. In 2013, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. His life and work stand as a testament to the power of strategic, non-violent action and the courage to live authentically even in the face of immense societal pressure. Number 3. The genius who taught skyscrapers to reach for the clouds. Fazlur Rahman Khan was a Bangladeshi-American structural engineer and architect who revolutionized the design of tall buildings. Born in Dhaka, British India, now Bangladesh, in 1929, Khan grew up in a family that valued education. He studied civil engineering at the Bengal Engineering College, Shibur, and then at Ahsanullah Engineering College, now Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology. He received a Fulbright scholarship and a Pakistani government scholarship which allowed him to travel to the United States for graduate studies at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. There, he earned 2 master's degrees and a H.D. in structural engineering. In 1955, Khan joined the renowned architectural firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM, in Chicago. At that time, traditional skyscraper design, which relied on rigid internal steel frames, became increasingly inefficient and expensive for buildings over 40 or 50 stories. The amount of steel required to resist wind forces grew exponentially with height, making super-tall structures impractical. Khan began to think about how buildings could work more like 3-dimensional structures, rather than just collections of 2-dimensional frames. His breakthrough came with the development of tubular structural systems. Instead of a skeleton-like frame hidden inside, Khan envisioned the building's exterior walls acting like a hollow tube, providing much of the necessary strength and stiffness, especially against wind and seismic loads. This was a fundamental shift in thinking. He developed several variations of this concept. His first major implementation was the DeWitt Chestnut Apartments in Chicago, completed 1964, which used a framed tube system. His most famous innovations include the trussed tube and the bundled tube. The John Hancock Center in Chicago, completed 1969, is a prime example of the trussed tube, with its distinctive exterior X-bracing. This system allowed for a 100-story building that used significantly less steel than a conventional frame would have required. It also created large, open floor spaces inside. Then came the Sears Tower, now Willis Tower, completed in 1973. For this project, Khan introduced the bundled tube system. It consisted of 9 square tubes bundled together at the base. As the building rises, these tubes terminate at different heights, creating the tower's characteristic stepped-back appearance. This design was incredibly efficient, allowing the Sears Tower to become the world's tallest building at the time, a title it held for nearly 25 years, while using a remarkably economical amount of steel. Kahn's innovations didn't just make buildings taller. They made them more efficient, more economical, and often more aesthetically interesting. His designs considered the building as a whole system, integrating structure and architecture. He believed that the structure of a building should be an inherent part of its aesthetic expression. His work paved the way for the super-tall skyscrapers that now define skylines around the world, including structures like the Burj Khalifa, often called the Einstein of structural engineering, or the father of modern skyscrapers. Fazlur Khan was also a humanist who emphasized the social responsibility of engineers and architects. He was concerned with how buildings affected the people who used them and the urban environment. He was a respected professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Khan died suddenly of a heart attack in 1982 at the age of 52 while on a trip to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. His legacy is monumental, quite literally etched into the skylines of major cities. His structural systems continue to influence the design of high-rise buildings, globally, allowing architects and engineers to dream ever higher. Number 2. The doctor who begged colleagues to wash their hands and was called crazy for it. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian physician working in the mid-19th century, whose observations could have saved countless lives. But his ideas were largely rejected by the established medical community of his time, leading to tragic consequences for him and many others. Born in 1818 in Buda, now part of Budapest, Semmelweis received his doctorate in medicine from the University of Vienna in 1844 and specialized in obstetrics. In 1846, Semmelweis began working at the Vienna General Hospital's first obstetrical clinic. He was deeply troubled by the high rates of childbed fever, puerperal fever, in this clinic, a devastating and often fatal infection that afflicted women after childbirth. The first clinic, staffed by doctors and medical students, had a mortality rate from childbed fever that was consistently 3 to 5 times higher, sometimes even more, than the second clinic, which was staffed by midwives. This disparity was well known and terrifying to pregnant women. Many begged to be admitted to the second clinic. Semmelweis was determined to find the cause. He meticulously examined records, ruled out various theories like overcrowding and climate, and observed the practices in both clinics. One crucial clue came in 1847 when a colleague, a pathologist, died after accidentally pricking his finger with a scalpel during an autopsy on a woman who had died of childbed fever. The pathologist's own autopsy revealed symptoms remarkably similar to those of the women dying from childbed fever. Semmelweis hypothesized that cadaverous particles, unseen material from autopsies, were being transmitted from the autopsy room to an examining room via the hands of the doctors and medical students to the pregnant women during examinations. The students and doctors in the first clinic frequently performed autopsies before attending to patients in the maternity ward, while the midwives in the second clinic did not. To test his theory, Semmelweis instituted a strict policy in May 1847. All doctors and students had to wash their hands thoroughly in a chlorinated lime solution before examining patients, particularly after performing autopsies. Chlorinated lime was chosen because he thought it would best remove the putrid smell of the cadaverous particles. The results were dramatic and immediate. The mortality rate in the first clinic plummeted, dropping from around 18% to about 1 to 2%, comparable to the second clinic. Despite this overwhelming evidence, Semmelweis's ideas were met with resistance, skepticism, and even hostility from many of his colleagues. The prevailing medical theories at the time did not include the concept of germs causing disease. Louis Pasteur's germ theory was still years away. Many doctors found it offensive to suggest that their own hands could be transmitting deadly diseases. It implied they were personally responsible for their patients' deaths. Semmelweis' confrontational and sometimes abrasive personality didn't help his cause. He published his findings but struggled to articulate them in a way that convinced the medical establishment. He lost his post in Vienna in 1849, partly due to the political turmoil of the time, but also due to the opposition to his ideas. He returned to Pest, Hungary, where he implemented his handwashing policy at the Szent Rókos Hospital, again achieving a significant reduction in childbed fever deaths. He published his principal work on the subject in 1861, but it was poorly received. Frustrated by the continued rejection of his life-saving discovery, Semmelweis grew increasingly bitter and erratic. His public letters denouncing prominent European obstetricians as irresponsible murderers alienated many. In 1865, he suffered a mental breakdown. He was lured to a Viennese insane asylum under false pretenses and committed. Just 2 weeks later, he died at the age of 47 from an infected wound on his hand, possibly sustained from a beating by guards. Ironically, he died from the very type of infection he had fought so hard to prevent. Only years after his death, with the acceptance of Pasteur's germ theory and Joseph Lister's work on antiseptic surgery, was the profound importance of Ignaz Semmelweis's discovery fully recognized. He is now considered a pioneer of antiseptic policy and a tragic hero of medical history. Number 1. The godmother of movies who directed 1,000 films before Hollywood was Hollywood. Alice Guy Blash was a true pioneer of cinema, quite possibly the first narrative filmmaker and one of the most prolific directors of the early silent film era. Yet, for many decades, her enormous contributions were largely forgotten or misattributed to her male colleagues or husband. Born in France in 1873, Alice Guy began her career as a secretary for Léon Gaumont, who owned a camera manufacturing company. In 1895, she attended the Lumiere brothers' first demonstration of projected motion pictures. She was immediately captivated by the potential of this new medium, not just for recording reality, but for telling stories. Most early films were short actualities, scenes of everyday life, like a train arriving at a station. Guy asked Gaumont if she could try making her own little scenes with the company's equipment. He agreed, as long as it didn't interfere with her secretarial duties. In 1896, Alice Guy directed what is considered by many historians to be one of the very first narrative films, La Fille aux Choux, The Cabbage Fairy. Over the next decade as head of film production for Gaumont, she directed, produced, or supervised hundreds of films. She experimented with various genres, including comedies, dramas, fantasies, historical epics, and religious stories. She was an innovator, pioneering the use of close-ups, hand-tinted color, synchronized sound, using Gaumont's chronophone system, which synchronized film projection with gramophone records, and special effects like double exposure and running film backward. She directed films with all-black casts, such as A Fool and His Money, 1912, years before it became common. In 1907, Alice Guy married Herbert Blash, an English cameraman, who soon became Gaumont's production manager for the United States. She resigned from Gaumont and moved with him to the U.S. Initially, she supported her husband's career, but her passion for filmmaking soon led her back to directing. In 1910, she founded her own film studio, Solax Company, in Flushing, New York, before Hollywood had even become the center of the American film industry. She was one of the first women, if not the first, to own and run her own movie studio. The sign outside famously read, "Be Natural." At Solax, and later when working for other companies after Solax was absorbed, Alice Guy Blash directed and produced hundreds more films. She was involved in every aspect of production, From writing scripts and directing actors to overseeing set design and editing, she was known for her naturalistic acting style and her ability to tell engaging stories. Estimates suggest she made around 1,000 films throughout her career, though only about 150 are known to survive today. Many were lost, destroyed, or worse, credited to others. Her career began to decline in the late 1910s and early 1920s. The film industry was changing, becoming more consolidated and male-dominated. Her marriage to Herbert Blasch ended in divorce in 1922. He had started his own film company and had an affair with one of their actresses. She directed her last film in 1920. Unable to find work in the evolving Hollywood system, she returned to France in 1922 with her children. She never made another film. For many years, Alice Guy Blasch's groundbreaking work was largely overlooked. Film histories often ignored her or minimized her role. Some of her films were even attributed to her male assistants or her husband. She spent years trying to correct the record and get recognition for her contributions, writing memoirs and letters. It was only in the later 20th century and early 21st century, thanks to the work of film historians and feminist scholars, that her extraordinary legacy began to be rediscovered and celebrated. Alice Guy Blasch was not just a female filmmaker. She was a foundational figure in the birth of cinema itself, shaping the very language of how movies tell stories.